So hello and welcome to the interactive virtual craft fair held from Tuesday the 23rd to Sunday the 28th of March 2021. The interactive virtual craft fair is a wonderful mix of live sessions, demonstrations, workshops, live chat, but also the opportunity to buy direct from our exhibitors throughout the course of the show. And you can have a look at everything that's going on through our website, interact.handmadeinbritain.co.uk. So my name is Alice and I am a part of the Handmade in Britain team, and we're going to be joined by Bryony Applegate, who is a practitioner who revolves around designing and making functional ceramic objects. So without further ado, let's bring her on screen and let's have a look in the studio. So Bryony, it's lovely to see you. Oh God, that's me again. There we go. It's lovely to see you. How are you? How are you today? Good.
Very good. It's nice to be back casting some small pieces just to show you guys kind of what I'm doing, because some of the pieces that I'm selling are huge and very hard to work with. They take quite a while to make.
Well, I tell you what, for people that are joining us and might not be familiar with your work, tell us a little bit about your practice and your pieces.
So I have just graduated from the Royal College of Art. I was the COVID year, specialising in ceramics, and I used Quest funding. I'm a Quest scholar, and I used them to help fund my masters. I really like experimentation, so working in the kind of same materials. So I work a lot in porcelain, but pushing it in lots of different directions, trying different techniques. So that's where this piece, which is actually for auction at the moment, has come from. So this was a technique that I pushed when I was at the Royal College of Art, making a specific type of clay, combining different slips and things together to create this piping formula, I guess, into a mould, and then it kind of holds itself, and it really makes you think what kind of material it is. So that was one stage that I went into, and then the other side of things was marbling. So that was inspired by a pre-1750s slipware plate, which is, in my eyes, really, really not attractive. But it was a project to take something like that and then bring it into a contemporary way. So that's how I've ended up making my slipware pieces. So this is one of the pieces that's currently on sale at the moment. And it's a big kind of marbled vase. It's got different blues and greens in it. And it's kind of made in the same way as it would have been made back in the 1750s, but it's kind of been brought up to date with more vibrant colours and more contemporary form. And yeah, it's just something to have fun with, and every single one of them comes out differently.
Now we kind of know you in the past of doing a lot of tableware, but you're actually showing with us more of your sculptural pieces as well. What's kind of driven you in that direction?
So, as I said before, I like to experiment, and although I work a lot with making tableware, like beautiful tableware for beautiful food, it's kind of like working with another artist. A chef is another artist in a different discipline. But when I then stumble across something that I want to push further, I try and make that in a more sculptural way, because at the end of the day, sometimes it can't be used as a product to eat from. And pushing something like this is to create bigger forms, and that's what I'm doing at the moment, is making bigger forms or wall features. They're things that you just can't eat off, but they are still very experimental, very beautiful, very kind of different in their own way. And it's just my way, I think, of getting ideas that I have in my head out and to the world and showing everybody, and then like moving on to the next thing. So a lot of the pieces that I have been making are very one-off pieces, and then I can move on to something else, because as soon as I mess up one thing, it opens a new door for something else. So
I was going to say there's really kind of no messing up because it really does, like you said, kind of lead to something else. And certainly for us this afternoon, you're going to, I'm going to take that and say you're going to lead in and actually show us a demonstration about, how you create some of your pieces. So you're going to be doing some marble slip casting for us. So I'm going to hand it over to you, but it'd be lovely to hear what you're going to be doing and talk us through.
Okay, so marble slip casting is used in quite a lot of artists use it in different ways. If you want the outside of a piece marble, then you cast on the inside of the mold first. If you want it to be on the top of a plate, it's kind of a reverse situation. So I'm going to do the same technique as I did with the big vases, and all you're going to do is you get a little cup of slip, just a white slip, so nice kind of background colour, and then I just swirl a tiny bit of another colour in the top, and then just give that its own kind of swirl. So if you can see just in the top there, this is then going to be poured straight into the mould, and you can just pour it wherever it likes, and you're kind of controlling it but also letting it be free and do what it wants to, and then you just pour it all the way around the mould, allowing it to be covered the whole way across and back out again. 1 second pop. That was my next door neighbour Poppy that you have seen yesterday. And then once you've put the shell in, you then just top it up with the rest of the slip. And then you just leave that for about 6 minutes or so that the moisture can be sucked out from the plaster to create a shell, which is what will create your piece. There's one that I did earlier, which will make it a lot quicker to show you. So this piece has been poured out and it's just got a shell of ceramic inside it. And all I'm going to do now is, with my knife that I have placed somewhere, spin on a turntable, cutting the excess off the top, taking that away, and then I allow that to dry for a couple more minutes, depending on how wet the mould is. And as you can see in there, the cup is in there, and then it will pull itself away when it gets a bit drier, and then you can pop it out, and then it reveals the pattern. So by the end of this session, that will have come out, and then I can show you.
You kind of never know what you're going to get, do you? Kind of with it, so like, mixing and then you're putting it in. It really is kind of, is the plaster going to be really, really dry and kind of suck it kind of where it lands, or is it going to pull down the bottom? So do you still get that sense of excitement about what you're going to find kind of when you take it out of the plaster mold?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're adding the slip to your small pot of slip, you could either do like loads of little strings, or you could do one big blob, and every single way you add that, it will come out differently in the pot. So adding a big blob would have kind of like one big swish going around the mold, whereas a couple of lines will then just kind of create this zebra pattern, I guess. And yeah, they all come out differently, and they're all very exciting, and you can kind of make different patterns with different shades at the same time. So this piece has 3 different blues in it and a green, so you can kind of just let it kind of merges itself together and creates different colors on top of that. So it's fun and exciting and very kind of different. As soon as you see something, you imagine one thing and then it comes out completely differently, but that's fine because that's the nature of it. That's what happens. That's the excitement of it. So that's what keeps me coming back to it all the time.
So we can see that you've got your marbling collection, but also you've done a few kind of piping pieces that we can actually see running through the shop that you've got with us. You've got some beautiful wall art, and you've also got some beautiful bowls as well. What's different now about kind of piping? What's kind of, what kind of do you really enjoy, about the technique?
Well, it's very different, and it's something that people just can't seem to get their head around, which is something that I quite like. I like the fact that people think, how can you make porcelain do that, or how did you even come up with that idea? How is it even made? So it's kind of interesting to get people's reactions more than anything. I'm very aware that it's completely different to my slipware pieces, but I am starting to kind of bring them together and make kind of sculptural pieces that have a slip cast bottom, and bringing both elements together. But I have to be very conscious that piping is one technique and marbling is another technique, but they're also very different styles, and putting two of them together might be incredibly kind of confusing for your brain to look at. Anyway, so I'm kind of, yeah, just experimenting with different forms and trying to bring my two techniques together so that people can see that it's the same artist that's making them. But really my drive for making all of my pieces is just experimentation, and as soon as one thing happens, I move on to making something else that's similar but slightly different, that works more, and yeah, different things like that. So it's all about just trial and error and seeing what's fun and what's not.
So is it the material that kind of leads you, or do you actually start by drawing something, or do you take it just as you've created something and that's just going to immediately allow you to cast something else or make a different mold based on what you've achieved?
I have ideas in my head, so like I could go to a gallery and see a painting, and there's a nice shape in a painting that I'd like the look of. I'd then come back to the workshop, and usually I do a plaster turning, so I will turn everything on a plaster lathe, and I will just create different forms. So this is just a cylindrical form that I've just turned to create part of a mold that's going to be coming out soon, but it's a very therapeutic technique again, and it's something that kind of draws me. Like, you can create really different patterns, sometimes very intricate patterns, sometimes just big bulbous patterns, and that is where the beginning stage comes in. So I have to turn all of the insides of these, and then I make a mold of it, and then I can use it as a piece itself. So I have lots of different pieces around me of different molds. I can show you actually some behind me here. So these pieces, they're all my molds, my models, sorry. So they're the masters, they're the pieces that I kind of have turned and then make molds of, and then I can make them into what I'm doing now.
If we get very technical, I can ask you about how many pieces per mold you actually have, from like 3-part mold to going even further. In some instances, is it, it's your own imagination is your limitation sometimes by how far you can really push some of your work, or is it really, using the lathe and using kind of, different shapes to pour plaster over? Well,
yeah, so this is a good question, because you can kind of, I've recently for a restaurant I've turned a kind of blob shape on the lathe, but then from other experiments that I've done recently, I then kind of covered that in a foil and made another form out of it. So it's kind of the same shape, but it has a different texture on the surface, and it's just kind of like forever ending. You can make hundreds of different things with different materials. You can pour plaster on materials and then pull them away, which is how I've used greaseproof paper and tin foil and different things in the kitchen to try and make a kitchen range. And it's just all about experimentation, and if something doesn't work, then you just think, how can I make that work, if you really want to. And if you don't want to, you just think, we'll go on to the next thing and see what happens.
You mentioned a word there, being tactile, and actually thinking about your tableware, but then actually looking at your piped pieces and your marble. With the marble, you do want to go and touch it. It had that beautiful, glazed surface, but you want to see, does the colour, can you feel those colours? But then with your pipe pieces, the feel of that running through your fingers to then that soft, smooth base. That kind of just resonates immediately with that word too, because it looks like it's two different makers, but it's actually the one maker that you, that creates both of those pieces.
Yeah, it's very, that's why I want to kind of bring them together, because ceramics is tactile at the end of the day, and it's something that has been hard when it comes to being online, and people that are looking at the show now will probably look at those pieces and think they're nice, but if I can't see them, then it's really hard to kind of gauge what they're like. I mean, the big globes are completely soft, and they're kind of, you could sit there for hours just kind of stroking this big blob. When I'm at exhibitions, I sit there stroking my work all the time, and then people kind of notice me, and I'm like, oh, sorry, I shouldn't be stroking everything all the time. But they're so tactile, and it's something that's how ceramics kind of speaks to people sometimes. So this piece may look really fragile, and people will be worried to pick it up, but because it's porcelain and now it's vitreous, it's actually very strong. It's a very strong material. I mean, the delicate part is obviously how thin the actual piping is itself, but the structure is held really well now. And that is another thing that I've had to take into consideration when making the actual material to pipe into, because if you add too much of one thing and not enough of the other, it can warp too much in the kiln, or it's not handleable when you're putting it in the kiln and things. So, but it's just one of those, I understand that it is so hard to gauge ceramics through a screen, and my favourite part is being tactile. So bringing people into the studio and seeing things and just saying, hold it. And then people are like, oh no, I don't want to. I'm like, honestly, just hold it. It's absolutely fine. I mean, if I can do it, then anybody can hold it, because some of my pieces do like to bounce on the floor every now and then. I mean, that happens in the studio. So, but yeah, no, it's just it's such a tactile thing. And another thing that I'd say about this piece is that it is smooth on the outside, and the inside has got the piping technique on it, because I've piped it into a mold like this. So this is one half of the big ball, marble ball, sorry. So that's how big they start off being, and then these are kind of like tools in themselves, to pipe into and to slip cast into, and then create.
Because when you're talking about them, you know, being quite tactile, would you set out with a use in mind? And what would you use some of your pieces for? So that beautiful piped bowl that you've got in front of you, what could people use that for?
My favourite thing about that bowl is I wouldn't use it because I feel like it's more of a sculptural piece, but the piping allows incredible shadows to come through it. So it kind of, if you put it up against a wall in front of a window, or even on a table with sunlight and light coming through it, the shadows that you can get are kind of incredible. There is a few pictures of some shadows on there, and I also do some lighting that has similar shadows, and it's just kind of creates its own pattern around itself as well as the pattern itself. So it sparkles when you kind of moving it around as well. So it is because it's a tactile piece, it's still nice to hold and move around, and then yeah, it's purely a sculptural piece. I wouldn't use this one as much because I've kind of pushed it to its limit. This bowl is as big as it's probably going to get because of the material and how it can kind of flop and warp in the kiln and things. So it's quite a miracle piece, that one.
It actually sounds like, you know, with your tableware, it's very much, you know, function and then it's form. Whereas it really sounds like with your more sculptural pieces that you're showing with us, it's form over function.
Yeah.
Do you think that's right?
I think it's kind of, it looks like two different artists, and in my head I have kind of two different paths, but they still combine together. So if I'm working on something like this, I then think about how to scale it down and try to include it into some of my pieces. So there's a piece that I'm working for a restaurant at the moment that has a piped element to the dish. So I'm bringing that element in, my sculptural element, into being able to use it, but still obviously having a practical side of things. So it's the possibilities are endless. Like you can create so many different things in different ways, and it's just finding that kind of elegant, nice, but practical way of doing things. Especially for the food side of things. On the sculptural side of things, you can push it as far as you like, and if it breaks, it breaks. If it warps, sometimes it warps in a really nice way. And it's the nature of ceramics as well. If I'm going to make something that thin, I'm going to expect it to be warping and to be moving. But it's controlling the kind of chaos at the same time. I'm piping into a mold, but I'm letting the piping do what it wants to do at the same time. There's lots behind it, and there's lots that can be done with it. So I kind of, my mind's always going. I've always got different ideas happening, and I've always got different ideas that I want to try. I'll wake up one morning and I'm like, I need to try this idea. I need to get it out of my head. And then as soon as I've done that, I think, oh, I could use that technique on that form, and I could do this and I could do that. So it's kind of like being in an artist's head is like running at 50,000 miles an hour sometimes.
It just sounds one thing informs the other and then keeps going back and kind of driving you forward, but it's never such a straight line.
Yeah.
It's obviously kind of a wheelie line. Now, obviously, the last year's been challenging, for us all, but has that time allowed you to kind of, experiment or push anything further? Or are we actually seeing, with the pieces that you've got online, kind of the culmination, of that time, recently?
Yeah, so in lockdown, I've been out of university. This time last year, we were basically kind of kicked out and said everything's online now, which was hard in itself. You can't do ceramics online. So I then kind of just thought, let's just get through this online process, get my studio. So I've been here since June last year. I moved in June last year, so I've still got a few bits to do in the studio. But I've moved in enough to look like I've been here for about 10 years. And I have just focused as much as possible on making and creating what I want to create, and what I like, getting all my ideas out of my head without having to kind of justify them. Because like when you're at uni and you're at school, you have to always say, I'm doing this because, and I'm doing this because, when really it's all about having fun, and I just love making. So the main aim for me during lockdown was to just forget about running a business and more about kind of having a body of work that I can then show. So I've done quite a few pieces of tableware that I can then say to like chefs and restaurants, I have made this tableware. It's available at the moment. There's a kind of technique behind it. There's this, that, blah, blah, blah. And then at the same time, bounce off those ideas and start creating more sculptural pieces that look nice in contemporary homes, or even quite like country homes and things like that, bringing in a kind of contemporary element that you can just have on your wall, and it looks nice and very simplistic, but still something that people kind of see coming off the wall, and you want to explore it more and touch it and feel it and things like that. So my piped donuts and the half donut ring, that piece sits quite far off the wall. And if you look at it from one direction, it's completely different to looking at it from the front. From the front, it just looks like a flat piece, and then from the side, it actually kind of comes off the wall, and there's different dimensions to it. So it's all, yes, I've just been focusing a lot on that, and I've got a lot of new pieces that I've had a kind of what's the word, like a wind of creation, where this week I've just made loads of different patterns with some balls that I'm going to put on the wall and things like that. So it's kind of like a give and take, and I have a couple of days off to just kind of do some online stuff and all the online stuff that you have to do at the moment, and then I go back into the studio and I'm just like a bull in a china shop, making as much as possible.
It just sounds like you're creating, for fun and not justifying it. You really are kind of making things that you enjoy, and we can see that, because I can see how your collection has changed. But talking about pleasing things, how is it getting on in the mould? Are we ready to maybe have a peek? Are we dry enough to have a look?
This piece should be drying. I'll pour the other piece out now, because that one's actually been casting for quite a while. So you just pour all of the excess out. When you pour the excess out, that's just leaving a shell behind at the end. I've actually left this in for a bit too long because I got too busy talking. So
now, what does it mean when you leave it in for a long time? For anyone that's not familiar with the ceramic process, how does time, change? Does it change a thickness of something?
So if you leave something in, I usually time my pieces to be about 6 minutes in the mould, which gives it quite a nice kind of a thickness that's, I quite like. I like the thin aspect of ceramics, but also if you're going to use it, it needs to be kind of substantially thick. That one that I've left in there will actually look quite chunky now when it comes out. The rim will look quite chunky. I can post that on Instagram later and show you guys kind of the difference between that piece and the piece that I'm just about to pull out for you that I did earlier. So this piece has come out looking like that. So you just drop it out, and then that's what the shape looks like. And it's quite a faint grey marble on it. Let me get a bit closer. And then that's just kind of a nice subtle light grey. It will fire and it will become a lot darker, because for some reason in ceramics everything is quite deceiving to the eye. So one colour that you look at now will actually come out quite dark when it's through the whole of its firing process. So I can also, people want to keep tuned, show them that on Instagram when I've put them through the firing and things like that. And then, yeah, so that's the main process. It's very therapeutic. It's something that I love doing. That's another reason why I like to go into tableware, because you can make about 20 of the same pieces, and it's very therapeutic and relaxing. It can just turn your brain off for a little bit. And then these pieces are kind of like, let's try it and let's get going.
That's great. Thank you so much, Bryony. It's been really lovely for us to come into the studio and to have a look at some of your processes, and also having a little look at some of your hidden molds that we got to see. So thank you. That was like having a sneak peek. Now, it'd be wonderful to see actually those images on Instagram. So, please do let us know, because it'd be wonderful to continue and to see how they've turned out. So once again, Bryony, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon.